Thank you for having me this morning. So I'm going to do a presentation on brand marketing for startups. I'm going to hopefully have time at the end to dive into questions. If you have any questions about how what I say applies to your company, we can try to go through that as well. And then at the end, I have a couple of things around viral marketing. So that'll be like a little bonus at the end. The main focus is brand marketing. So as a bit of an introduction into who I am, I'm Sarah McBride. I'm originally from Northern Ireland, but I've lived in England, France, and the US, so my accent is like totally messed up. I also speak a bit of French, so if at any point you have no idea what I'm saying, I can sort of try it in French with my even more messed up French accent. But the reason why I'm here is I lead brand marketing at a company called Zenly. If you haven't heard of Zenly, it's a French-founded consumer social app started by Antoine Martin and Alexis Bonnieu like 10 years ago. Today, we are a top 10 social app globally. In April, we announced we've reached 35 million monthly active users. We have a global user base. My team has brand operations across 8 local markets, many of them in Asia, but we run everything from Paris, from an 80-person team. And we're, just one example, I mentioned Asia, we're consistently ranked a top 3 social app in Japan. Like, in Japan, they love us. It's really cool. And my previous experience before getting to Paris and to Zenly, I've had roles across investing. So I've worked in 2 different venture capital funds. I'm an angel investor today for the fund Atomico in London. And I do that in my spare time, but also operating roles. I've worked with a bunch of early stage companies. My thing has always been about social media, brand, community building, and how that can really create growth, success opportunities for early stage companies, and also help with fundraising. I love to study brand marketing. I love to understand how it can be harnessed by early stage companies. And so everything you're going to see in this deck is really just sort of my perception of the space, how I've seen it applied, how I think it works. Please feel free to challenge if you think it's not relevant to you or you don't understand how it applies. Like I said, let's talk about it at the end. And most recently, I led the rebrand of Zenly. So if any of you are Zenly users here, you probably opened the app at the end of April and you were like, what the fuck? Because it looked totally different. So we completely redesigned the app, added a bunch of new features, and at the same time on my team, we rebranded Zenly. This is what Zenly looked like when I joined the company 2.5 years ago. As you can see, the color scheme's very bright, very poppy. We do a lot of user research. We talk to people directly. We talk to our target users, and one of the first things we ask them is, what is your perception of Zenly, if you could describe it? And a lot of people say, oh, it's young, but sometimes we had heard the word childish, which is not what we wanted to hear because our target persona is college students. And college students in the US who really set consumer culture these days and then export it on TikTok. And the last thing you want is a childish brand. I have a screenshot here from our Instagram account pre-rebranding and our app store. These are probably 2 of the most primary touch points or surfaces for our brand. So that kind of gives you a sense of what it looked like before. And then this is what it looks like after. Romanzier, TechCrunch said that we made social maps cool again, so that's nice. And this is what the new brand identity looks like. We changed our logo, we went all lowercase, we changed our tagline to Your World to reflect all the new features we did. We redid our brand tone of voice, we redid everything. And the app experience, you can sort of see from those screenshots at the bottom from the article, looks totally different as well. And so brand and product really worked hand in hand the whole way through that redesign process to bring this sort of new, mature, cooler version of Zenly into the world. So that's my latest brand work. And so the game plan for this presentation, I'm going to start with just like general brand philosophy, like how I personally approach it and think about it. Then go into the actual basics of building your brand blocks and your brand strategy, and then finish up with some examples in action, because I think that's always the most helpful. When especially in a tech company, I'm early stage, it's really hard sometimes, because I find this with early stage companies I work with, to justify the investment in brand. And I think it's always helpful to start with like a really vivid image of like what you're actually trying to do with this work and what the outcome will be of your investment. And so I like to describe brand as the little space that your company occupies in people's brains. So the extent to which you invest in brand marketing will determine to a large extent what that space in people's brains look like. So you say the word Zenly, and maybe you've just heard it in passing, And so that space that we hold in your brain for the word Zenly is maybe just the brand name, maybe it's the logo, maybe it's like, oh, is that app that like lets you see what your friends are doing? For people who've heard of Zenly, maybe use the app, follow us on social media, we've had the chance to sort of color in that space a little bit more in their brain. So we have more control over the specific words that show up in their brain when they hear Zenly, the colors of the walls, the feeling that they have whenever you say Zenly. And so that's how I kind of describe brand and the purpose of brand. It's like you're trying to color in the walls, build the space in people's brain that comes up for them whenever you mention the brand name. And so when we think about, okay, brand marketing, it's good to kind of separate from the get-go what brand marketing is going to be for your company versus growth marketing. They're both broadly marketing, but they're two very, very separate things. And for example, at Zenly, we operate as like completely separate teams, like within the marketing umbrella. And so your growth marketing is typically things like ads, user acquisition, anything where you're putting money in and you expect to see an immediate output in terms of user growth. Whereas brand marketing, again, is all these things that you do to fill the color in people's brain whenever they think about the brand. You also have comms, PR, product marketing, events, content, community. They all fall under brand. Where you place them between growth and brand marketing really just comes down to your company, your objectives, how you want to structure your team. At Zenly, for example, all of these things sit under my team on the brand side. And then growth marketing is separate with influencers, but it's really just comes down to what your company's objectives are. And so when to invest in brand? I'm biased, but I think from day zero, you should invest in brand. But the good news is that the answers to a lot of the questions each and every one of you would have asked yourself when you started your company, those answers also form the foundations for your brand. So you don't have to be like, oh my God, I have to invest in brand, I have to do everything from scratch. You've already done the heavy lifting if you're sitting in this room today and you're working on a company and you have a clear idea of what you're doing. And so I'm going to talk through exactly how. I imagine when you decided to start a company, you asked yourself, what is the core value proposition of what I'm building? And you asked that because you need to be able to explain to people how the product works, what the outcome is going to be for the user whenever they use your product. Congratulations. If you've answered that question, you actually have the starting point for your one-line description, which is a really key piece of your brand. If you also ask yourself the question, what need does this solve? You've gone through the process of understanding what pain does this alleviate in people's lives? What am I helping them to achieve if they use my product or my service? What potential am I unlocking for them? And so if you answered this question, you've also just defined the values for your company, another important building block for your brand. You probably also asked who has this need. Maybe you've defined your early customers. Maybe you've gone as far as saying what age you think they are, what job they do, what company they work in, what sector they work in. If you've answered this question, you've already started to build a persona that acts as like the vibe checker for your brand. I'm going to get into that in a bit, but this is like really, really critical as you start to think about brand. And finally, you've maybe thought, hey, like, are there already people in this space building the thing that I'm building? Maybe you've started to think about, okay, what's the feature set I need to create to differentiate from them? If you've gone through this thought process, you're already thinking about brand positioning, and that's great. And you can start to think about, how do I build my brand to make sure whenever they hear the name of my company, the little space in their brain looks different to the competitors. You've answered these questions. That's great. Now into building a brand. So there's two parts to this. You have the brand blocks. So this is everything that might make up a traditional brand book. You might pay an agency, you might have a designer, maybe your co-founder loves to mess around in Figma. You're first going to want to start by building these brand blocks. This is your brand. Then you take these and you apply them to your brand marketing channels. And so we're going to kind of go through what this is in practice, but this is a snapshot. Everything I'm kind of talking about in this presentation ladders up to the outputs being the things on this slide. So before you even get started, the best thing you can do is build a rich profile or multiple profiles of your target persona. So when you were asking all those questions about what am I building, who is it for, whose life is my product going to make better, you're already starting to build a picture of a human being in your head and push yourself, really, really try to picture a real human being and go into details of what clothes do they wear, what is their name, where do they come from, what brands do they like, what traits do they have. every decision you have going forward related to brand, you should reference back to this person. And it's really important to do the exercise of being extremely specific so that you can get everybody into your room, explain this person to them, and they build a picture in their head, and everybody's working from the same page moving forward. And this person is your vibe checker. And so if you create a logo, one of the tests you can kind of do is a hypothetical test to say, okay, would this person think this logo is cool? Or if you're, and we'll get into this, if you're deciding which channel to invest in, you'd be like, is this person on TikTok? Are they on Instagram? If they're on TikTok, what kind of content's on their For You page? Is it memes? Is it people dancing? And so it's really important to start with this because it helps the whole team get on the same page and also just gives you this kind of checkpoint for every decision you make along the way. And then the second thing is, of course, distill what you've actually built or what you're planning to build into a couple of sentences and keep pushing yourself to reduce it. Are there certain words that keep coming up whenever you talk about your feature set and your product? Is there a hierarchy of things that your product does? And the objective here with doing this is really to get as close as you can to this one-line description. And so the idea with this stage is you have this rich profile of a person who's your target persona, who's your vibe checker. You have as close as what you think you can get to your one-line description. And with these two elements, you then start to create your brand book. And you do this because at this stage, you're maybe working with an outside designer, you're maybe hiring a designer, someone new into the team, and you want to minimize the time lost by people not understanding what you're trying to build. And so these two elements can really help to paint this picture so that whenever someone jumps in a Figma file and has to start designing a logo, they have these kind of reference and these checkpoints. And so building these brand blocks. First of all, you want to create your brand book. And so these are all the kind of traditional brand things. It's your logo, it's your, if you have slides, it's the background, it's the visual elements that make up the brand, it's your font, it's your color scheme. This stuff, I will say, is actually great to work with an agency on because they'll offer a sort of package deal. They'll package it up, they'll hand it over, you'll have all your hex codes, you'll have a nice Figma file that the whole team can drag and drop from. This is the first and most traditional point of call in building your brand blocks. Then you want to create your brand personality. So these are the things that aren't visual. This is the tone of voice. When you write copy on your website, are you speaking directly to the person? Have you personified your brand? For Zenly, we pretend Zenly is a person. We tell our users that we love them. We speak in the first person in the app. We say, oh, I couldn't find that. I couldn't find that place. Or, oh, I can't find that person with that username. We write to them as if you're speaking person to person, like you're speaking to your best friend. And that all comes from the brand personality that we crafted for Zenly. If you're a B2B company, it might be a little bit different. That being said, all you have to do is go on Shopify's Twitter and see that see their tweets. They tweet like, yes, like slay, e-commerce. And that's because they made a conscious decision to exhibit almost like Gen Z like tone of voice, even though they're like a website builder. That's an approach you can take. So brand personality is really important. And an exercise that we did at Zenly to really refine our brand personality is we created another persona, which is, okay, if Zenly was a human being, what do they look like? What do they wear? Right down to the level of writing Instagram captions. If Zenly was a human being who in our head was like a 22-year-old guy who lives in New York City, hosts house parties, everyone comes over, he loves to DJ, he spends the whole night in the kitchen speaking to his friends, like, you know, really into this detail. What would that person's Instagram captions look like? And we like force ourselves to actually write that out. And again, it's about having this like centralized idea that everybody in the team can understand. Everybody can understand an Instagram caption. And so that's a really great exercise to do. And then the final part, it's a bit of an extension of your brand book, but if you're a very visual kind of led brand and company, you're going to want to define your art direction and your photography direction. And so the exercise we did at Zenly is distilling that into like a 5-slide PDF, because we work with a lot of freelance photographers, and the idea is we can just send this PDF to them and anybody can pick up a camera, take photos, and they're in the Zenly style. And this doc will be super visual. And so you've gone and you've built all these things. You have a nice Figma file, you have a color palette, you have your art direction, you have your tone of voice. Now you need to choose the brand channels where these brand blocks are brought to life. And so the place that you start on this is by mapping out your user journey. And again, this is work you've probably already done. Maybe you've done it just once the person lands on your website or downloads your app, you've mapped out their process through to retention, referrals of friends, repeat usage, but you want to add on the part before that. How do you think they ended up on your website in the first place? How do you think they ended up downloading the app in the first place? And you map out all those points. And then along the way, that's how you determine which channels you need to have a presence on. And once you have an idea of those channels, you look at your building blocks and you say, how do we apply these building blocks to this channel? And so I think a great example here again is just social media. So on Instagram, your content is at the moment still going to be image-based. And so you take your brand book and your color scheme and you decide, okay, is our content going to be photography focused? If we're doing infographics, which does this color scheme work for Instagram? But you're always also balancing it with what actually works on this platform, like what content performs. And you do this kind of like meshing, like melding process of like pulling from your brand, but also pulling from what works on the platform. TikTok is like a whole other thing, which we can talk about separately, because really brands have no power on TikTok and you just have to do what goes viral. Some examples for Zenly, it never made sense for us to invest in email marketing. One of our core product principles is that you should spend as little time on your phone as possible. You should open Zenly, see where your friends are, go hang out with them, get on with your day. We don't ask for your email address and sign up because we never wanted to send our users emails. They don't need to spend time reading emails from us. For a B2B SaaS company, you probably don't need an Instagram account. You probably don't have this like aesthetic vibe, like people are doom scrolling on the metro. Do you really think they want to see an image from your like B2B SaaS company? Probably not, right? But you probably do need a Twitter strategy because the people who are buying your product, using your product, take a 15-minute Twitter break during a meeting, and that's where it makes sense for your brand to show up. So you're going to want a Twitter content strategy and a community strategy, but you don't need to waste your time with Instagram. And again, those insights come from mapping out this journey, really knowing your target persona, and then making these trade-offs and these decisions as a result. And if you're a consumer app, you're probably going to spend way more time on your app store page, the images, the screenshots, the description of the app store SEO, than you're going to spend on a website. Right? And so you take one, which is the building blocks of the brand book, all the visual stuff. You take two, which is the user journey and the brand channels, and you put them together and you've got your brand strategy. It's like done. It's not that hard. The best way to then, again, make these kind of trade-offs in your brand strategy and say, okay, we need to spend X amount of money on brand, is you should really look forward. So what's the next milestone for your company? Is everybody on the team right now working towards getting our first 20K users? Is the most important thing we can work on right now getting ourselves ready for our next fundraise? So you need to look at that kind of high level company objective and milestone and work backwards from it and understand how brand is going to support you in getting there. And so that will be personal to each company in the room right now, but that's kind of the best way to then again make those hard decisions around where you invest your time. Do you need to hire for this? How much time you spend on it as a founder. Also, just a quick note on what success looks like so that you can kind of quickly validate if this investment was worth it. Here's some metrics that I find helpful for brand. I mean, here's the thing as well. Growth marketing is amazing because you put $1 in and you can immediately say how many users that generated. The pitfall with brand marketing is it's so hard to measure. And so brand marketing really is like, you have to put your faith in it. You're doing it for the long term. Every day you're building that foundation, which in 10 years time is really going to pay off. But there are some metrics you can use. So Google have an awareness survey platform. I can't actually remember the name of it because I don't think it's called Google Surveys, but you can just like Google awareness surveys. And it's super cheap. So what you can do is like define a demographic, an age, a country, and you can just spin up these surveys. And so you can use this for user research. Although I don't think it's the best method, bless you. But we use it for brand awareness for Zenly, and it's just to get like a really quick pulse on, okay, out of 18 to 25-year-olds in Indonesia, how many of them have heard of Zenly? Super simple. So that's good, it's cheap, it's easy to do. You should really be monitoring if you are creating content on social channels. The best metrics are your content reach. Are you getting picked up by the algorithm? Does anyone care? And content engagement, just to validate, like, is your content any good or is this a complete waste of time? The social mentions and user-generated content is just a great check on, okay, you've built this brand. Does it have meaning? Does it stick? Do people want to tell their friends about it? Are they going out of their way to go on social media to tell people about your brand? And so TweetDeck is free. I would encourage everyone to use TweetDeck. Use all the kind of search functionality in it. I always have a tab open on my work laptop with TweetDeck open, which searches for Zenly in every language where we have coverage. You can also do like search indicators that say only show me tweets with a minimum of 100 likes. You can do all kinds of stuff with TweetDeck. I actually think a lot of VCs use it to like get deal flow. So it's a great tool and it's free. And you just have it in your web browser. So everybody should be on it. You can also use it to just keep an eye on what competitors are doing as well, or the space. It's a great tool. And then native search as well. So TikTok search is not great. There aren't any additional tools yet. So you just have to spend the time on TikTok, like going through content and finding it. And of course your website analytics if you have a website. But the best thing you can do if you're early stage is you talk to your existing users or you talk to target users. You understand, have they heard of you? And this is what we do at Zenly. Like we go on campuses. We did 2 trips in the past year to the US. We went onto campuses and we talked to our target users. And the first questions we ask them is, have you ever heard of Zenly? Yes or no. If you've heard of it, where did you hear about it? Do you remember where you were? Do you remember who you were with? Do you remember the conversation you were having that made Zenly come up? Do you remember how the person described it? If I had to ask you right now to describe Zenly, how would you describe it? And you drill, because everything they say is an insight into how your brand is being perceived. And that's feedback on the brand work that you've done, but also an indication of the brand work you still need to do. Okay, cool. So the fun part, brand marketing in action. Okay, Glossier. Who knows Glossier? Thank you. Okay, my favorite brand in the world. Glossier is amazing at brand marketing because, so for the people, because most of them didn't put their hand up, Glossier is a skincare beauty brand. It was started by Emily Weiss in the US, I think over 10 years ago. And their whole thing, it actually started as a blog. So Emily was an intern at Vogue. I think she became a staff writer. And she was just obsessed with skincare. And she would be conducting these interviews with famous models. And after the interview, she'd be like, hey, by the way, like, which fake tan do you use? Or like, which blush do you use? And she'd get all these kind of off the record insights, and she'd post them on her blog. And this was as an antidote actually to Vogue and to a lot of the fashion magazines who were paid by brands who had these huge margins on these products that didn't do anything. And they were just telling people, you need to buy this $100 thing of face cream or this $100 mascara, it's gonna work. And it was bullshit. And so she started this blog and she built this community around sharing real beauty skincare tips that actually worked. And from that, she built a brand called Glossier. And so it's a line of products, it's makeup and it's skincare. And all the products developed come directly from the community. What they want, what they need, what they think works, what they think doesn't work. And their whole brand from day one was all about, we are an accessible touch point. We're not about makeup, we're about beauty and skincare. We're about a community-centric, community-led company, and we're all about a specific aesthetic. And so they just did a great job of, you know, a lot of their success as a company is predicated on their approach to brand from day one, because they were entering a space, they were competing against people with billions of dollars of marketing budget, and they had to get people to care about them. This is what it looks like. This is the product line. They have like a really, really beautiful logo that's just very, very simple and eye-catching. This is how it then maps to their Instagram account. There's this like Glossier aesthetic. I think honestly, I want to say they invented the shelfie, which is like these photos where you show off what's in like your makeup cabinet. It's aspirational, but it's also accessible. This also bleeds into the influencers that they work with. They work with Olivia Rodrigo, the singer, who the target customers for Glossier are Gen Z and millennials. They all know who she is. And so Glossier just does a really, really, really great job of this. And even to today, it's been like 10 years, they're worth a fortune. You can see Glossier Inc. is a people-powered beauty ecosystem. It's still all about their community, the products that they need, giving them stuff at an accessible price point that makes them care about beauty and skincare, and it's not just about makeup. So his question was about how here it's not all just branded content. We're not seeing the logo everywhere. There's a lot of content on their Instagram feed here that doesn't even show the product. So great question. That's actually in reference to the point I made earlier. whenever you have your brand blocks and then you go to your brand channels and you say, okay, I need to be on Instagram, you then look at Instagram and you say, what content works on Instagram? Because the worst thing you can do as a brand is invest in a channel on social media and get 10 likes. It's really bad. Don't do that. So whenever you go on the channel, you have to back yourself and say, okay, we're going to make an investment on Instagram, and this is how long we think it's going to take to get 100 likes or get 25% engagement rate, although that's insane. Don't try to get that. Like 10% engagement rate in our posts. And you have to go to Instagram, you have to understand what works. And so for Glossier, I'm not sure if they did this. I haven't spoken to Emily Weiss, although I'd love to. What you would do is you'd say, okay, who's our target persona? So let's say a 21-year-old living in New York City who interns on the weekend, is a student at NYU. She has some disposable income, but not a lot, so she can't go and buy $100 things of cream. She spends half her life on her phone and a lot of time on Instagram. The brands that she follows on Instagram have an aspirational, clean aesthetic. All she wants in her apartment is to have a beautiful beauty counter with a see-through box and all these beauty products that speak to her, that have values. So they've built a rich profile. They have an idea of the brand she already follows, and they need to mix their brand, but also with content that they know people want to see on their feed, because ultimately you're taking up real estate on their phone. And so you can't just do whatever you want. With Glossier, it's a bit of a mix because they also pioneered this aesthetic, and that's why their brand is so strong. But if you look at other beauty brands that popped up the years around Glossier, you'll see a lot of this because people don't want to go on Instagram every day and be advertised to. They want to see aspirational pictures. They want to get inspired. They want to connect to people. They want to see beautiful things. That's a beautiful feed. I would spend time just looking at that feed, you know? But as a result, I'm also seeing Glossier here and there, but it doesn't have to be everywhere. So it's really is that mix, and you have to be so disciplined as well, because of course you're like, but I don't have my logo. But you do. This is the thing on Instagram. You scroll on Instagram, you see the username. The username is your company name, right? It might not be your logo, but it's still your company name. So that's kind of the trade-off. But this is best in class consumer marketing on Instagram, truly. So BeReal, I think most people have heard of it, right? I haven't spoken to BeReal directly, so I'm not claiming that this is 100% true. This is just my understanding of what's going on with BeReal. I don't think BeReal care about brand, okay? And I don't think they need to care about brand because their whole value proposition is BeReal, right? In the moment, capture what's going on, move on, don't waste your time. And so as a brand, they can't be overly polished. They can't have spent millions of dollars with a branding agency. You just come in, you're on the app for 2 seconds, you know? But what they do care about is the people who use their app. And they care about that because in consumer social, the holy grail is reaching the mainstream, but also kicking off a flywheel, right? That whenever you get people into the app, they're inviting 5 friends, and then the product virality takes over. But to get that in the first place, you have to find pockets of people who, as a group, come and join the app and then tell their friends. And so with pretty much every consumer social app today, that's always started on college campuses, and especially in the US, because US 21-year-olds export culture to the rest of the West. And so for BeReal, what they did care about was getting US college students to use the app. And what's amazing at the moment is if you get US college students to use the app and they think you're cool, they'll go on TikTok and they'll post videos about it, and all of a sudden you have free viral marketing. And so I think BeReal is a great example of how early stage companies can actually not care about brand, but pick one element within their brand strategy to actually care about and do it really, really well, and then unlock, they have millions and millions and millions of users now. So as you can see here, and we found this out as well whenever we did research on college campuses back in March. I was at UCLA and USC in California, and we were talking to people, and we were like, hey, what's the last app you downloaded? And every single person was like, oh my God, have you heard of BeReal? And I was like, yeah, you've heard of BeReal? They were all using BeReal. And they all found out about it because they were going to parties hosted by BeReal. There were frat houses that had a night sponsored by BeReal. There were music events sponsored by BeReal. And this was all because BeReal decided within the brand strategy to focus on getting college students in the US to use their app. And then if you look up the BeReal hashtag on TikTok, as I said, they're just very lucky that their target demo loves to post on TikTok and go viral. There's 492 million views for videos related to BeReal. And so that's really, really helps catapult them into the mainstream. And what's great is now their product just takes over. They have viral mechanics within the product to take over the growth. And finally, Zenly. And so this was for the rebrand. I actually talked quite a lot about this earlier, so I don't need to go super into detail. But you know, we had this feedback from our users that our brand looked a bit infantile, a bit young. We really aggressively wanted to go after this US college set. So we knew we needed a new brand. We were also shipping a bunch of new features, and we needed the brand to reflect the new updated value proposition of the app. And so we went through this whole process of changing our logo, tagline, photography direction, brand personality. The channels this was then going to be conveyed across was in-app, of course, the App Store, TikTok, Instagram, our website, our merch. We love merch. We redid all of our merch. We have bucket hats now. I'm very happy about that for summer. And our brand strategy, yeah, like I said, it's the college-age students. And so we had to combine these new brand blocks with the channels where these people were going to be and kind of merge the two and make it make sense. And so, yeah, I showed you these before. This is, so I was telling the team before everyone arrived, so we have like a bunch of users in Japan and they really love Zenly. And so they were a little upset when we changed the brand. So we're now doing a lot of work to kind of rebuild that love, make sure that we've like changed the wallpaper in people's brains whenever they think about Zenly to the new wallpaper, the new brand. And so this is actually something, I think it's going live next week. In Tokyo, we're doing a 3D billboard with the new like brand ID for Zenly. So it mixes this kind of like holographic situation in the background. We have like a 3D element. This is our 3D art direction. We have like our new tagline in there. It's going to be like very, very visual, and hopefully people like it and like us. And this is our photography direction. It's inspired by, if anyone has heard of like photo dump aesthetic on Instagram, it's inspired by like the film camera aesthetic as well. These are all things that Gen Z are obsessed with at the moment. And again, came from user research. When we talked to these students in California, I asked them to show me their Instagram feed. I was like, which brands do you follow? Which influencers do you follow? What kind of content can you create? Can I see your Instagram account? And not to like overgeneralize, but a lot of them like to do photo dumps and a lot of them like to take images on film. And we really wanted our brand to reflect that. So we redid our photography guide. We work with a bunch of really cool up and coming content creators. We send them our photography guide and they just take photos for us. And we get fun stuff like this. And it's a very chaotic birthday party. I have no idea what was happening. Very quickly, just common pitfalls to look out for. You are an early stage company, you don't have unlimited resource, you certainly don't have unlimited time. Do not spread yourself too thin. Honestly, there's a lot to be said for just picking one channel and doing it really well. And so you can squat the social handle. Like you can be a B2B SaaS company and you're probably gonna wanna go onto Instagram and like reserve that handle, but don't feel like you have to post to that account, just lock it and keep it private. You also you can't be too limiting, that's a double negative. But basically, the best brands know who they are for just as much as who they are not for. So for Zenly, I mean, I also didn't actually explain what Zenly was, so I'm really sorry if people are like, what is Zenly? But it's like a live map of your people and your places. So it's like combining Find My Friends, where it's like constant real-time location sharing. And the new functionality also brings in a map element, so you can search for places, you can get directions, and it combines it into what's called a social map. One of the first things people say whenever you talk about Zenly, they're like, oh my God, that's so good for safety. Like, do you have a lot of parents that use Zenly? We do have a lot of parents that use Zenly, but we don't go out and say this app is for parents. This app is not for parents. This app is for finding out where the 2 a.m. like party is, like which nightclub are my friends in, who slept over at whose house the night before. Like our app is for college students to spend more time with their friends. People can use it how they like, but our brand will reflect who we really want to use the app. And we're not gonna go and say, hey, parents should use this. And it's good to be able to say, okay, this is who we're for, but it's also, this is who we're not for, because it just helps you get really, really specific. And also, this is a process that you should repeat as your company evolves. Zenly's been around for 10 years. We're on to V5 of the brand. So that's a rebrand on average every 2 years. And we have 35 million monthly active users. So I know a lot of people were talking, you know, as we did the intros about, oh, we're thinking about brand, we pivoted, we need to think about brand again. Even if everything's going great, like it's good to kind of check in on this as you go along and don't be afraid to make really big changes as you go, because your brand should evolve as your company evolves and as your customer evolves in their life as well. So the question was, Zenly is a global brand. How do we approach localizing the brand? Especially because we have a massive user base across a lot of markets in Asia, but we're a French-founded company. We're in countries like all over the world. How we approach it is the central brand is created in Paris. It's created by my very talented team. And we created a brand that we think doesn't have a lot of words involved with it. But our kind of secret sauce is that we have these local teams on the ground in our, I think, 8 or 9 biggest markets. And we like vibe check everything with them. And so when we came up with the new tagline, Zenly Your World, the first thing we did was like, hey, do you think people in your country are gonna understand this in English? No? Can you translate it? Okay, that's too many characters to fit into the App Store description or like the App Store tagline. And from the get-go, they were involved in that rebranding process. Anytime we thought we'd hit on something in English, we immediately said, hey, does this work in Japanese? Is this gonna work in Korean? Does this work in traditional Chinese? Like, and especially whenever you're working with these characters. And so what's also great for Zenly is our art direction is like this really beautiful 3D that maps to the product. That's universal, everybody understands that. But a lot of it is because we have people on the ground, which really helps us to vibe check those things for the central brand blogs. One thing we also have then in those local markets is a local TikTok account. And so that for us is where we really do localize the brand through content on our TikTok account. So our community managers are like 21-year-olds who live in Japan or in any of our markets. They create content that reflects TikTok trends in Japan and not trends that I'm seeing on my For You page in Paris. And so that's where we kind of decided, okay, the central brand is this kind of global one that should work across every single market and be kind of universal. But we picked one marketing, our brand channel, which is TikTok, where we decided, okay, here on this specific channel, we have the ability to fully localize Zenly, the inside jokes, the trends, different elements of the brand and the product, we fully localize to those markets. So it's kind of like a mix of both. The question was, if you're in the early stage and you still haven't found product market fit, how deep should you go into the branding process if you're gonna pivot in like 2 months' time? Great question. I think the reason why you should invest in brand from day zero is because it actually helps you in that test and learn phase to find product market fit. But I think there's this balance. So if you are really not sure what you can do, I think you should still create the persona. So those questions we asked at the start that form the kind of blocks, the founding blocks of your brand are questions you've already asked and answered for yourself. Ultimately, if you're gonna show people a product, you probably need like a name. And you maybe need a logo, and there's maybe a landing page. And so you still have to make decisions around which color is this gonna be? Like, what's our font? You're still making those decisions, so you may as well take the tiny additional step of having like a almost informed decision of like, well, I think this like hypothetical vibe check or this hypothetical persona likes pink over blue, and that helps answer it. But it doesn't mean you go and spin up your Instagram account or your TikTok or your LinkedIn and you're like pumping out content until you start to have that data like, okay, this persona we're going after actually likes our product. It's kind of like the light touch. I think there's a way to do it without investing too much time, but also it just helps those experiments actually be effective, because whenever you've gone for you're testing a certain persona and they land on the page and the page is pink and they like pink, you've managed to convert them. So the question was, how do you approach the fear of potentially losing all your first customers because you rebranded? And how do you announce the rebrand? I believe in the early days that if you're gonna do a rebrand and it's a rebrand because you feel really good about some data you got on the persona you're going after, and you say, okay, we're all in on this like 21-year-old NYU student persona, and you rebrand. Of course, as you're doing the rebrand, try to check with a 21-year-old who goes to NYU if they like it, like try to get the early validation. But if you're saying, okay, we're all in on this, when you make that decision, you also accept that the 58-year-old who lives in the Midwest and was using your product, you have to accept that they're gonna not use your product anymore because they don't like the brand, and you have to make your peace with that and move on. Hopefully you've also done the calculations of there's a big enough market of 21-year-old NYU students to justify this business decision and this insane focus on them. But I think in the early stages, you kind of up to a critical mass of people. You can't afford to lose them if you think the opportunity you're going after is bigger to replace them. And then in terms of announcing it, honestly, people don't care. Like, people don't care that you've rebranded. They care about the thing your product is going to do for them. And so you have a lot of companies, and it's more the bigger companies, and I get it. You have like Dropbox did a rebrand, and they create this like dedicated like brand website, and they're like, oh, we rebranded. On like the Twitter account, they send an email to their users. Users don't care. They don't care. It might be nice to have a little note like, oh, hey, like things might look a bit different around here, but it's still the same company. We're still providing the same value to you, because you don't want to just ignore it because they're going to think you got hacked, right? Especially if the branding's bad. But you don't have to make a big song and dance about it. Just make sure your product is still catering to their needs. That being said, you know, there's certain things you're going to want to do on channels because visually you might be completely different. So to talk you through what we did for Zenly, take Instagram, for example, our visual direction changed so much that we archived all of our old content a week before we launched the new version. That was also great because people started to ask questions. We have nearly 200,000 followers on our Instagram account. We run paid acquisition on Instagram. We have millions and millions of people on the Zenly Instagram account every single week. And so a bunch of those people were landing on the account and there was nothing there. And we took our profile picture of the popsicle and we covered it in a cloth. So you could see the outline of a popsicle, but you didn't know what was underneath. And by just doing that, it created like buzz, and people were on Twitter, especially our users in Japan, saying, what's going on? Has Zenly been hacked? Which was great whenever they thought that. And so we wrapped the accounts, all the social accounts, archived the content, and then on the day we shipped it, I think we posted like 9 images in one go so that there was like a full grid for people to see whenever they landed on the account. We knew there would be a massive spike in visits to our social profiles on those days, so we made sure all the content went live as soon as the app was on the App Store ready to update. So all those little things were timed, because also when you do a rebrand, people open your product, they see something's different, they're going to be like, oh, what's going on? And they'll go to your social channels. So it's a really great moment to showcase the new brand. But I definitely am not an advocate for this kind of like pat on the back, like, oh, we like built a new brand. Like, your users don't care. Just show them the product that you've been building for them. And yeah, that's how we approached it. So the question was, moving from, you know, in the early stages, you might offer the service for free to get people in and start to validate some of those early questions, but you want to transition those existing customers to paying customers because they have to pay for it. So what's the best approach to that? So I think this, again, comes back to the questions you've asked yourself around your brand persona and the picture you want people to have in their head when they like interact with your product. So maybe you want to take the approach where you are, I think someone over here said you're building in public. That's awesome. So building in public is a really great way to craft your brand, because often building in public means blog posts, a newsletter, tweets from the founder, the founding team. And so your customers don't just build a relationship with your product, but build a relationship with the team and the founding story behind the company. And that's a human connection, which I believe is much stronger than a connection to like this hypothetical like thing. It's like human to human. And so if you're taking the building in public approach, or you want to start to build that and build that human connection, then actually literally what you just said to me, of like this very personal message of like, hey, you know, I'm the founder of this company, or I work on this team. We've been working really hard to develop this product. Looks like you really like it, so we're really grateful. These things cost money. We've decided to start charging for the product. It's this. If you don't agree, would love to talk to you about it, would love to hear your feedback, because at the end of the day, it's a human on the other end of that email, or on the other end of that push notification that you're sending to them. And if they don't like it, you can afford to lose them, because that person's not going to be someone who's going to go on and tell their CTO friends about your product, or, you know, take the 30-minute meeting with the resourcing manager at the company to convince them to pay for it. And so it's also just a good test of like, okay, the people we've acquired so far, do we need to keep them, or do we need to try a bit harder to find people who like really love us enough to pay for it? Because it's also just a validation for your product if people are going to pay for it. Or you can just, you know, you can be like, oh, we're like Apple, you know. It's like as if Steve Jobs was ever emailing people like, hey, your iPhone costs $1,000 now. Like, sorry. You know, they took the approach of like, we are the most beautiful product in the world. Like, you should thank us for existing. And that's a different approach you can take if you are the Apple of what you're building. So the question was, how often should you rebrand after product market fit? It's super personalized to each company. I think one thing that can really help there is if you do actually invest the time in a designer or in a design agency who build a brand system, because typically from that first kind of project that they do, they should be trying to build something that's lasting, or that there are different elements. Maybe you can like change this part of the color scheme, you can change this gradient, we can actually split the logo in two at some point to make it lasting and evolve. That being said, for Zenly, for example, our almost like 2-year cadence for rebranding is just like a real reflection of our user base, which are teenagers. Like, think how many phases you went through when you were a teenager, like your gothic phase, your like analyst phase, like you had so many different phases. And so if you're interacting with an app every single day, which is like almost like a part of your life, that app should kind of evolve with you. And also consumer apps are kind of like fashion as well. You need to be updating the user interface, you need to give people something fresh, you need to give something to people to talk about. So for consumer apps, it kind of does have a built-in cadence where you have to do it quite regularly. But if you take Dropbox as an example, like I don't know how long they had that brand for. They only like updated it recently, but I'd say it was like at least 5 years. And it was fine. And I think, again, just comes down to speaking to your users, speaking to your customers, understanding what's going on in their lives, understanding the brands that they follow, understanding what makes up their kind of consumerscape. Are they on Instagram? Are they on TikTok? Are they reading the Financial Times? What are the brands that they care about? And making a decision based on that. But I think the critical point is if you get any data that's saying that you're actively not able to go after the entire customer set within your target persona that you have product market fit in, but you're at like 20K out of potential 20 million people, then you need to understand why those 20 million people aren't using it, and you might start to get evidence that it's from the brand. And that's also what happened with Zenly, where we realized like we really need to mature the brand here to get these US college students to think that Zenly's cool. But also like 5 years is fine as well. So the question was about how as a brand you can evolve if you really have values as kind of like one of the center points of your brand, just given that each generation can have a different value set, people's values change over the time, like how do you adapt to that? And I think the dating app is a really, really great example. I mean, if you do take the example of dating apps, if you look at the likes of Tinder, a lot of what they have done has been investing in PR campaigns to really show what their values are, and also product and feature investments to show that too. So just because at one point you said your values were something, again, you can have this like honest conversation or like admission to your users and say, hey, we know this subject is really important to you, and because it's important to you, it's important to us, therefore we're investing in this. But I think with any of these questions, that work is only effective if you're truly authentic and you're actually like putting your money where your mouth is, as we say in English. If you're going to do anything around values for your brand, it cannot be empty. And so for Zenly, I don't even think we talk about our values anywhere, but we have really, really clear kind of design principles, this idea of like you should spend the minimum amount of time on your phone. We want you to spend time with your friends, and the way we communicate those values is making sure that every single product decision we make reflects that. But we also don't do like a PR campaign being like, these are our values. So again, just depends on your brand, depends on your channels, but I don't think you should ever feel like it's fixed. If your user base really cares about something and you think that they want to see that in your company, you should speak to them, you should invest money, and you should follow through with it and be authentic when you do that. I think in general, by the way, for values as well, it's something you want to be really careful with, because it's also the first thing that people are going to call you out on if they think you're not being true to your values. And that's why if you're going to be very, very upfront about your values, you need to make sure that every single person in the organization, no matter what they do, understand what those values are and understand what they mean for business decisions and product decisions, so that you're constantly kind of servicing those values. Otherwise, I think it can really, really work against you. So also be careful. The question was about validating your brand basically with your target persona. It's also a mix. It would be great if every single brand decision was data driven, but it's not going to be. Brand is also an art, And so if you're creating a brand, you have to be a bit of an artist, and you have to say, this is what I think this thing should look like. This is the art I want to put into the world, and I really hope that people like it and buy it. And then you de-risk that by then trying to get this data, these validation points. And so of course, if you can do that as you're kind of going through the design process, so something we did at Zenly is, because we have these local teams in these local markets, many of them are actually Zenly users themselves and in that target demo. And so we were kind of showing them early designs. There are like proper research methods you can go through where you don't give them any context. You ask them to pick a picture, which one they think, or like use a word to describe how you feel whenever you saw this. You can do kind of exercises like that before you go and lock the brand book to try to get some of those early data points. But also a lot of it is like you put the thing out into the world and you wait 3 months and you see if your stats that you had before the rebrand are the same but ideally better than before. And that's where the kind of art comes into it, where you cross your fingers. If you're an early stage customer, for sure that you just don't have the data. And that's why if you do the kind of process I talked through at the start about building this persona and really trying to have this hypothetical person, to me, that's the best thing you can do to de-risk it. But of course, it's a risk, and that's all part of the process. It's, you can treat your brand just the same as you're going to treat a product and validate it. You build something because you have this insight of a pain point that someone has. You build what you think is the solution. You put it out into the world, and then you see if it actually fixes a solution. And your brand is the same. It's just a little bit like artistic and nicer. So the question was, if you have a couple of different target customers, how can you create content and be on channels that appeals to them kind of individually? So I think it depends on your brand channels and your strategy for each one. What you could do is you could say, okay, for Instagram, we know there are a lot of young mums using Instagram, for example. They follow these kinds of accounts. They like this kind of aesthetic. We know that that's very different to the aesthetic that backpackers like. But we know that Instagram is the most important brand channel for us because we run Instagram ads. And so when the backpacker or the mom sees the Instagram ad, they land on your profile. And so for something like Instagram, you'll need to build a kind of higher level brand that doesn't reach too much into either of those personas so that it can appeal to both of them. And that's where you actually ignore a little bit of the persona stuff and you go more into the artist and say, this is what I want my brand to be, this is what I want it to be in the world. Maybe you lean more on the values, and that's how you craft your brand there. But if you take an email or a channel like email marketing, you have a phenomenal ability to segment your database of email addresses and have tailored email campaigns to each of those. So that's a great one for that. Also, TikTok is great for this as well. So for TikTok, you might say, okay, we're not even going to have a brand account, or we're not going to post that much content, but we're going to build a content creator program. And again, it gives you the ability for you to take your brand directly to each of those segments and to have it tailored to each one. So you partner with a group of backpackers and they talk about your product in a certain way, but you also partner with a group of like mom influencers on TikTok and they tailor the brand in a certain way. And also on TikTok as well, you can have multiple brand accounts, and because of the way the algorithm works, it won't do any harm. So you could have like a dedicated backpacker kind of brand account, a dedicated mom account, whatever. So I think it's kind of like the Zenly thing where you still need to have this like baseline universal brand that's going to appeal to all of them. And so it's great to have done that exercise up front to know who the 4 different personas are so you can vibe check the brand against each of them. But it's whenever you get to the brand marketing strategy and you pick your channels, it's at that point you say, okay, this channel is for this segment, this channel is for all of them, but this piece of content is for this one, and you just have to break it down. But I think you can still build a brand that appeals to all of them. The question was, shouldn't you choose just one? And that comes back to the question of market sizing and resource. So if you were going really, really specific and you said, okay, we think backpackers who are 18 years old about to go to university really want to use our products, and you market size that and it's like 1 million people in France and you've raised venture money and you have like 12 months runway, you can't afford to only go after them when you have 12 months runway. And at that point you say, okay, look, to increase our market size on the other side, other side, we have to add and aggregate together across 4 personas. And in that case, it would be totally justified to have those 4 different things. But that's where this question becomes super personal to like your company, your stage, your objectives, how much money you have, if you're venture backed, all of those things. But I would always advocate in the earlier stage to be disciplined and focused and minimize the number of channels and personas that you're going after. But the reality of business is you can't always do that if you have big milestones to achieve. So that's the balance. So the question was how at Zenly we kind of bridge the gap between speaking with users through to building this global brand and then validating if it's working and getting that feedback. So to be honest, we receive kind of signals, feedback, inspiration across a spectrum of channels. And so my role as the brand lead is to be on top of all of that, kind of aggregate that information, synthesize it, and then understand what that should mean for our brand, tweak it accordingly, or rebuild the whole thing accordingly. And so those channels are user research. So I spoke about the research trip we did to the US, but we also did user research across all of our major markets. And those were like interviews. And so those were very in-depth, a lot of information. And the best way we found to synthesize that was, I presented it back to the company. And so just the act of having to put that into like 8 slides and I have 5 minutes at all hands to explain it to people was a great exercise in taking reams and reams and pages of interview content and saying, okay, here's 5 big ideas. Here's 3 things that surprised me. Here's 2 insights about their life. Or you say, okay, across all these, in Indonesia, let me paint to you a typical day for the users we spoke to, or here's what their Instagram feeds look like. And for me, the forcing function there was I had to present a slide deck to the company in 5 minutes, and that forced me to synthesize it. For your company, that might be something else. You might say, okay, the output of this user research is we do a 1-pager that summarizes like five key questions. So for that, it's really about synthesizing information, but you still have to do the hard work of these long form interviews. And honestly, it's the most valuable skill I've learned at Zenly, is this muscle you build for user research and just like drilling into the details. Like we have 35 million monthly active users. That is a lot of people, but I cannot tell you the value that we got from speaking to like 10, 18-year-olds on UCLA campus and understanding what their lives were like, because we also noticed so many similarities across those like 10 people, which again helps you to validate like, okay, if we make this decision based on this, maybe this also applies to 100 more people, or this applies also to students on the East Coast as well. Another signal that we take, with TweetDeck, read every single tweet in every single language that gets written about Zenly every single day. And that's a lot of content, and people on my team do the same thing in their local markets. We do like weekly community reports, which are shared with the whole company, that summarize the conversation about Zenly on social media that week, so everybody is empowered with that information. We have a phenomenal user care team and an army of user care agents who answer every single message that we receive, whether it's in-app reports, our care center, our social media channels. Every single message we receive is read by a human being and replied to. And again, those teams have structures where they feed that information up and they summarize it. And then we are, I think, one of the top users of Amplitude Analytics in the world. We track every single event in the app. We are extremely data-driven as a product organization, but also on the brand side. A TikTok goes viral in Indonesia where they're showing a certain feature, we can immediately jump into Amplitude and see the impact on the stats of that feature usage. So it's about mapping out all the places where you can get either quantitative or qualitative data and just trying to build systems that allow everybody in the organization to have access to that and have people who own the process for synthesizing that information and like owning that communication point. And that's how we approach it, and it's worked so far. Okay. So the question was about working with freelancers for brand management, also community, by the way. It's great to work with freelancers. Are there any red flags? I'm not going to answer your question because I don't think I have red flags, but I can tell you the stuff I do look for when working with freelancers. If it's anything in the content creation space, the community space, they're involved in social media, You do not need to look for someone who has got social media manager written on their CV. In my experience, some of the best people I've ever worked with are young people who are at college or have a job that's not full-time. They have some spare time, but they personally spend so many hours a day on social platforms. They already naturally have a tone of voice that aligns with your brand. They're at ease drafting tweets, drafting witty captions. They're warm, they like to speak to people. So much of it just comes down to actually who they are as a person, fully removed from professional life. And that's a really great starting point, because you're kind of de-risking things, right? Like, you don't need to train them up. You just say, hey, just be yourself, but you're posting from the brand account. Here's a Notion page with some like brand rules. Please don't use this word. If this happens, talk to me, but otherwise, like, be yourself. And again, it's back to this idea of humanizing brands. For your customers on the other side, they're really going to feel like they're talking to a human, and you should lean into that. You shouldn't try to like put this kind of like brand filter on top of it. And you can hire really great people, and it's also nice because a lot of the time you're giving people like a start or a bridge into the tech industry, which for me personally has always been a great thing. You have someone who maybe didn't go to college, or they haven't got kind of the right starting point with a graduate job, and this is a really great way for them to build experience, and you discover so much kind of non-traditional talent by taking that approach. So not a red flag, but still an approach. I have worked with some companies and personally worked on a couple of projects that like had these like crazy viral effects, which was really cool. And so here's just some examples. I don't believe there's like a perfect formula for virality. And when I was like 17 and interning for startups, running their social media accounts, they would sit me down and they'd be like, so we really want to go viral. And it's like, okay, that's nice, but no one can guarantee that. And so I don't believe there's any specific formula, but I think you should always be on the lookout for inspiration from other people. Maybe it's someone in like a completely different business vertical does something and you're like, hey, I think we can apply that to us. And it's great because it's usually free. So some examples. At Zenly, our approach is to surprise our users. So we care about every single tiny little detail in the app. We have these things called welcome messages at the top of the app, which are these messages where we're like, hey, hope you have a good day, or like, it's okay, I need to be hugged for a little while. You open the app and that's what you see. We tell our users that, and it's whimsy and it's nice, and let me tell you, Facebook is not doing that, okay? Find My Friends is not doing that. It's something that Zenly does, and as a result, we get tweets every single day from our users who get surprised in the morning when they open Zenly. They take a screenshot, they post it to Twitter. Now all 50 of their Twitter followers are like, oh, that's really nice that Zenly does that thing. Another thing we did at Zenly is we harnessed our map. So the app opens on the map. It's the core of the user experience. When you open the app, you will see user pins. You also see places now, but at the time it was just the faces of your friends. That gets a lot of screen time. That's a lot of real estate. And we decided to build a merch store for our users in Japan. And we decided to put it on their map in the form of an ice cream truck that was driving around with a countdown timer above it. And we gave no context. And so we put this on the map for many, 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 many people in Japan. I can't say the user base number, but it's huge. And everybody was like, what is this? And we took over Japanese TikTok for a week because people were screen recording, posting to TikTok and saying, does anyone know what is going on in Zenly? We had people who thought the truck was real and saw it on like the highway near their house and got in the car and tried to find the truck like in real life. So we got a bunch of TikToks like that. And then the countdown timer finished. We had a bunch of people, because we could see from our Amplitude insights, taking screen recordings at that moment, waiting to see what was on the other side. It unlocked, they tapped the truck, they got taken to this dedicated web experience. Someone bought a 5-foot Zenly popsicle statue that was one of a kind and cost 1.5 million yen, which is $14,000, that we actually hadn't manufactured and we put on there as like a joke, and then we had to make it. So that was really cool. It was like a really, really cool project, but the whole point is we thought about, okay, we could build a merch store and just tell people it's there, or we can put this really insane experience that they'd never seen before in the app in a place with like a lot of real estate and get people really excited about this project and what's happening. Another example, this is a venture fund that I briefly worked with called Shrug Capital. So it was an early stage fund fighting to get into super competitive deals. We did a lot of stuff in the consumer space, like really hot up and coming like consumer social companies and D2C. A lot of that fund was like predicated on having great relationships with other investors and kind of people in the tech space. And if any of you have a Twitter account, you're probably familiar with like tech Twitter as a genre of Twitter. And so what we did is we just tapped into that genre and kind of owned it. And so we built this, created this tearaway calendar called the Shrug Calendar. And we took tweets from all the kind of biggest influencers in tech Twitter. So think about like the Collison brothers, the founder of Stripe. We have Ashley Mayer, who was the head of comms for Glossier. These people with like hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter who are putting out stuff every single day about startup culture. And we took their tweets and we put it in a calendar. And then we shipped the calendar, thousands of the calendars, to all these people who are in the tech industry and influential on Twitter. And it blew up on Twitter because everybody wanted the calendar to see if they were in the calendar. Everyone started tweeting to try and get into the calendar for the next year. And on the desk of half the partners at Andreessen Horowitz, they have a calendar and potentially your tweet and your name is in it. And so this just went super viral. And I think the key point I wanted to make for this is help people look cool. You know, it was like a mark of coolness if you'd ended up in the calendar. And we knew that and we jumped on that. We jumped on tech Twitter and we put calendars on people's desks. Okay, yeah, these last two. So give people gifts, give people something personalized. So the two examples here are Glossier. In every single Glossier order, you get a sticker sheet. If you look at the laptop, the MacBook Air of a 21-year-old in the US, she probably has a Glossier sticker on it. These stickers, I imagine, cost very, very little to produce, and they're everywhere, and they're free, and it's a nice gift, and it's a way to physically take your brand footprint and make it go further, while also creating delight for your user because you're giving them a gift. This is from the Browser Company, which if you haven't heard of them, I highly recommend you look into. It's a fantastic company based in New York. It's early stage. They're rethinking the web browser entirely from scratch. So what they do is they have invite codes, a waiting list to get access to the product. They've done a lot of work to kind of create suspense and hype around the launch of their new web browser. And what they do is whenever you get off the waiting list and get onboarded into the product, they create this personalized card for you with like a gradient, your name is on it, and the whole point is people then go to Twitter, they post the card, and they're like, okay, well, like first of all, my name is on this beautifully designed thing. And look at me, I got access to this super exclusive tool that everybody else wants access to. And then it creates conversations that get retweeted. And again, you're giving people something personalized, you're making them feel special. You're also helping them tell people that they have access to exclusive things that you don't. And so a lot of the things for viral marketing all boil down to like a central kind of psychology within your users. So for Zenly, we want them to feel like we love them, because I don't think many tech companies are telling them that they love them. They're just so used to Facebook like taking their data. And other companies, not just Facebook, many people do it. And so we tell them that we love them and we surprise them and they don't expect that from us. With Shrug, we tapped into the fact that people tweet stuff and they want people at Andreessen Horowitz to read their tweets. And at Glossier, people want to put stickers on their laptop to show that they're a Glossier girl. And for Browser Company, people want to show that they got access to this awesome, like super exclusive tool. And they do it personalized. So those are just some ideas. And that is actually everything now. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, that was really long.